we are going to start with the most interesting chapter, and the name of the chapter is Classification of Plants. As we all have studied that, a great scientist called as Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker had divided living organisms into 5 kingdom classification. So you have studied already about the kingdoms called as Monera, Protista, fungi of the 5 kingdom classification. And this was proposed by a scientist called as Robert Whittaker in 1969 for the study of living organism. So let us see how Robert Whittaker classified the living organism into 5 different kingdoms. So living organisms based upon whether they are old or they are new are classified into prokaryotes and eukaryotes. When I say prokaryotic cells, that means those cells which are primitive cells, for example like bacteria. When I say the eukaryotic cells are those cells which are highly evolved, that means the cell organelles, nucleus and nucleus membrane is highly evolved in eukaryotic cells. Now these prokaryotic cells, example is subkingdom Monera, example bacteria. Now bacteria, they do not contain any well-defined cell organelles. When I talk about eukaryotic cells, it is further divided as based on the numbers of cells, the complexity of cells, that means unicellular or multicellular. When I say unicellular, that is called as Protista, example like amoeba, paramecium and euglena. And when I say multicellular organism, that means if the cell contains a cell wall or the cell does not contain a cell wall. So when I say cell wall, what comes in our mind? Yes, correct. That is nothing but the plant cell. That means the cell wall are either they can be autotrophic or heterotrophic. When I say autotrophic, that means kingdom Plantae, and when I say heterotrophic, kingdom fungi. And those without cell wall, that is kingdom Animalia. So this is the 5 kingdom classification done by Robert Whittaker, that is Monera, Protista, Plantae, fungi and Animalia. In this particular chapter, we are going to study about kingdom Plantae in further detail. So if you observe this beautiful tree over here, the color of this plant is green in color. Why? Because it contains a pigment called as chlorophyll. Now chlorophyll is present inside the chloroplast. So can I say that this plant will prepare its own organic food, and this process is called as photosynthesis. Now when I see the cell of the plant, they are eukaryotic cells, that means they are highly evolved cells. The first point says that the group of autotrophic living organism, that is nothing but plants, having eukaryotic cell. If you see these cells, the cell organelles are embedded, that means this is a eukaryotic cell. And plant, if I magnify this part of the leaf, the color is green because plant can prepare its own organic food. That means plants have become autotrophic as they can perform photosynthesis with the help of chlorophyll and with the help of sunlight. And living organisms of kingdom Plantae are the main source of energy, main source of nutrients, because plants can provide carbohydrates, it can provide certain minerals and proteins for all living organisms in this world. Now every organism, directly or indirectly, it depends on plants for its nutrition. Now further, if you study about classification, let us see what are the basic criteria of classification of plants. The first criteria for classification of plant is the presence or absence of any organ. That is a first criteria. That means, is there a specific organ present or absent in a plant cells? The present or absent of the separate conducting tissue is the second criteria. When I say conducting tissue, now this conducting tissue are called as xylem and phloem. The way we have veins and arteries in our body to supply blood, similarly plants will have xylem and phloem to conduct food and water. Always remember, the xylem will conduct water from lower parts of the body to the upper parts of the body, and phloem will conduct food from the leaf to all the parts of the body. So the second criteria is the presence or absence of separate conducting tissue called as xylem or phloem for the conduction of water and food is the next consideration of criteria of classification. Now this is called as phloem. Do plants bear seeds? Yes or no? Yes, some plants bear seeds and some plants do not bear seeds. So what is the third criteria? That if they do, then when seeds are encapsulated, sometimes the seeds are encapsulated inside the fruit. That means if you cut the fruit, you can see the seed inside. For example is apple, mango, etc. And some seeds are visible externally, like example is cycas, example is Christmas tree, pine tree, etc. Now this is also an important criteria for classification. Now the next criteria is finally depending upon the number of cotyledons. When I see the seed, if we can break the seeds into two cots, that means two parts, that seed is called as dicotyledon. If I cannot break the seed into two halves, that seed is called as monocotyledons. So it depends on the monocot and dicot. That's the final stage of classification criteria. When you talk about higher plants, so all higher plants are classified depending upon the different characteristics present in them. So what are the different characteristics depending upon the absence or presence of flower, fruits and seeds? And this is the way the higher plants are further classified into different groups. Now further we are going to study about plants. Plants are divided into two types. First one is called as cryptogams and second one is called as phanerogams. Now phanerogams, depending upon whether the seeds are enclosed with the help of a fruit or it is visible through the naked eyes. The phanerogams are further classified into gymnosperm and angiosperm. When I say gymnosperm, always remember my dear student that gymno means innate and sperm means seeds. Angiosperms mean the seeds are encapsulated, that means they are enclosed inside the fruit. Now this angiosperm is further classified into dicot and monocot. If you see the seed structure, if the seed gets divided into two equal parts, that is called as dicot. And if the seed does not get divided into two equal parts, it has only single cotyledon, it is called as monocots. Now the best example of dicot is nothing but a very beautiful fruit called as mango. And the example of monocot is nothing but corn or the wheat seeds. You cannot cut that into two equal half. Now we are going to study the introduction of different scientists who came and formulated the classification of plants. A well-known scientist called as Ichler in 1883. He was a botanist and he classified the entire kingdom Plantae into two parts. First one is he classified them into cryptogams and phanerogams. This is called as the sub-kingdom classification.